This is Marco Reus.
This is Shinji Kagawa.
This is Nuri Shahin.
Hello, this is Jadon Sancho.
And you're listening to the Yellow Wall podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 524 of the Yellow Wall Pods. I'm your host, Stefan Butzko, and today we'll talk about a rather disappointing 1-1 draw away to SC Freiburg, and we will preview Friday's match against Borussia Mönchengladbach, which will mark the final game of 2025. For that and more, I'm joined by Matthias Zug. Hello, Matthias.
Hello, Stefan. How are you doing today?
I'm doing excellent, and I'm also joined by Lars Pollmann. Hello, Lars. How are you doing?
I'm fine. Glad it's not just me this time, because I don't remember the last time we were the three of us, so that's nice.
I know, it has been a while. So I guess we'll talk about the Freiburg game. Lars, why don't we talk about the moments, well, not just the moments, but maybe the period before the red card, and I then guess we'll then talk about the period after the red card. But Lars, I personally thought Dortmund were playing a decent away game, probably could have scored a couple more goals here and there, but I did not feel like Freiburg were particularly threatening. Everything kind of felt under control, and I thought Dortmund were probably going to end up winning this game until the pass happened. What were your thoughts on the lineups that were chosen and the game in general until that moment?
I mean, I don't half remember the lineup, to be honest, because all these games, I've looked it up. The Gladbach game is the 56th of this year, and I think I covered 55 of them. Obviously, not all of them in the stadium, but they all just kind of blend together, so I don't really remember the lineup, but I remember feeling pretty much the same thing as you. Dortmund fully in control against one of their preferred opponents over the last few years. I think before this game they had won 7 in a row against Freiburg, and most of those games hadn't been particularly close, including the 4-1 in April, I think, which was obviously very important because Freiburg were one of those teams that Dortmund had to jump in order to qualify for the Champions League, which they ultimately did. They definitely had enough opportunities to score a second goal, and I don't know if Freiburg come back from that, but obviously, as you already alluded to, the entire game basically hinged on that one moment of, I don't know, madness, stupidity by Gregor Kobel. My immediate reaction was that it was 100% on Kobel. I would probably go back to it by being like a 90-10 or so situation, because I think Jobe Bellingham should at least have been aware of the opponent in his cover shadow. But I mean, the entire game, it's rare that you can pinpoint the exact moment, 90 minutes of football or 100 minutes of football if you include extra times or injury time. It's hard to, usually you don't get to say this one exact moment changed everything, but clearly that was the case on, when was it, Sunday?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was Sunday. It wasn't. It was the early game. But yeah. Yeah, I don't know if we have that many things to discuss. Obviously, Julian Riasson played as the left wing back, and Jan Koto, I thought, had another decent game as the right wing back. I personally also thought that the midfield trio, if you want to call it that, between Chukwuemeka, Bellingham, and Mecha looked decent again. And yeah, Fabio Silva and Guirassy. I think that was Fabio Silva's first Bundesliga start, and of course the first time they were paired up with each other, the two strikers we have. Matthias, a little bit cross heavy. maybe we can talk about this, especially in the beginning of the game. I think this at least to me seems like Dortmund are a little bit over-reliant on crossing right now. I understand what they're doing, but I mean, we had Guirassy attempt an overhead kick and stuff like that, but also a couple of decent chances came of that. What are your thoughts? Do you feel like Dortmund should play a little bit more through the middle, considering the quality they have in that area of the field, or are you a bit like Niko Kovac, who says if you have the space on the wing, you have to play through there?
Well, I mean, the tale of crosses kind of follows the tale of the match, because Dortmund were initially very cross heavy, but obviously if you look at the whole of the match, Freiburg crossed the ball 30 times and Dortmund 11 times. So you can kind of tell who was defending at what point and trying to hold on. I'll be honest, Stefan, I'm a fan of a balanced approach and not just one approach, because that makes you harder to defend against if you're not entirely sure from whence the attack shall come. That being said, when you have Guirassy and Fabio Silva in there, who are not exactly dainty little forwards, I think a few more crosses don't hurt. Jan Koch and Daniel Svensson can whip some pretty vicious crosses. So overall, I think it's not a bad strategy to open the game up in that way, especially if you play it out wide, you stretch the defense a little bit more than I remember seasons in the past where Dortmund were just always trying to force it down the middle. And I mean, gosh, I'd have PTSD from Augsburg matches where they just bunch up in the middle and that's the end of the match. And this does allow for more variety. But again, I do plead for variety by stretching out the team. You then automatically open up gaps centrally that you can also utilize. And Dortmund, of course, have the necessary players centrally in the pitch that can also utilize that. So I'm an advocate for balance versus one over the other. But of course, if you rely too much on crosses, it doesn't tend to favor you, since that oftentimes is my favorite stat to say, tell me who didn't win this match. So in this case, Freiburg. But I mean, a deeper analysis of this match is exceedingly difficult because, like Lars said, I mean, it completely flipped that second. And Kobel, who, even though he is an absolutely fantastic shot stopper, his reflexes are great. He's saved many a point and a victory for Dortmund in his time there. His decision-making with the ball at his feet is without a doubt his greatest weakness. And I think it's actually at times a pretty glaring weakness, and I don't know if that'll ever get any better. Because he's still young in terms of the way keepers develop, but he's not 20. So it's kind of like this is kind of who he is. When it comes to ball at the feet and decision making, I will trust, honestly, Alex Meyer more. When it comes to shot stopping, Gregor Kobel, without a doubt, is better there. With long range distribution, I actually think he's really, really good. When it comes to short build-up play distribution, at times, especially if the opposition presses, it can be a little bit hairy. This would not be the first time.
Yeah, now, last we just briefly talked about the blame game, whether it's 100% or 90% on Gregor Kobel. I do agree that Jobe Bellingham could have probably made another step quicker toward the ball, but it's still a horrible pass either way. Yeah. I don't think we really have to discuss whether Kobel is at fault here or not. I mean, he himself said it was a bit of a misunderstanding. I'm not entirely sure what was misunderstood. I feel like if you see the situation the way it was, you just got to play it long or think to your left to Schlotterbeck or wherever. But that was certainly not the thing to do, even though I understand overall the approach of wanting to play out the back and not just hoof it long all the time, especially since Dortmund basically passed the ball back to him in a attempt to control the game. But maybe if we then talk about, because we just alluded to how that flipped the script, do you think, Lars, that it should have flipped the script like that? Do you agree with the substitution of Pascal Groß for Fabio Silva, for example, and the ones that then ensued further down the line? And of course, Dortmund's reaction to basically fall back and try to defend their own box for what felt like almost 40 minutes.
I mean, it ended up being more than 40 minutes because of stoppage time. I can understand bringing on a midfielder just to be more compact. And I don't know who even was available other than Pascal Groß, who obviously really hasn't played much over the last few months. Maybe that was even part of the equation, him, having to get his chance eventually, and obviously a sort of chance presenting itself. I guess the other option would have been to bring on Adeyemi for fresh legs and to get, a bit of counterbalance, if you will. I think Fabio Silva just isn't fully ready to play more than 60 odd minutes right now, which is also why he hasn't really started many games, and which is why all this talk, which I'm pretty sure is being leaked by his camp about, the lack of playing time and his great wish to play for Portugal at the World Cup, is falling on deaf ears on my part, just because, get healthy and complain then, basically. So, and the annoying thing to me is when people look at this game and point at Niko Kovac and say, hey, why did you tell him to sit so deeply? I mean, no coach is telling his team, hey, let's bunker down and defend for 40 minutes and not have any balance and not have any possession and don't try at all to score a second goal. That's not what happens. I think Kovac said after the game that it was mostly down to, a psychological component with that one mistake kind of taking the air out of the wings. And I would also say that Freiburg did really well in the second half. Once a man up, they held up the pressure. They didn't allow Dortmund to, relieve themselves with possession. We know that Freiburg are very dangerous from set pieces, and Dortmund gave away a few of those too cheaply, I thought. Especially Julian Riasson, I think, gave away 2 or 3 of them, which was just stupid because Freiburg score 50% of their goals in the Bundesliga from set pieces. And obviously we know that Dortmund can be susceptible to them. So I think it was just a myriad of circumstances coming together, which made the game very difficult for Dortmund in the second half after the sending off. And to be honest, I would say that they defended pretty well, given the circumstances, because Freiburg had those 2 shots from distance, which Gregor Kobel sort of redeemed himself. Tipping the one from, I think, Suzuki on the crossbar was one of his best saves of the season, I would say. And then obviously Lukas Höhler scored the goal of his life, which he's only scoring once in his professional career. So sometimes you just gotta tip your cap, even though I think Emre Can can close him down a bit more, and Jan Couto probably shouldn't just allow the cross to come in, but still, that cross is probably happening 5, 10, however many times during a game in Freiburg, and most of the time nothing comes of it. So it was another unfortunate event, let's say, for Dortmund, but ultimately I think Dortmund cannot complain about gaining a point from their performance in the second half.
Yeah, I wasn't too best pleased. Matthias, when Niko Kovac says that it's a mental thing, maybe, that Dortmund were pushed so far back. Also, it's not been the first red card in recent history that Dortmund conceded. I feel like this pattern happens quite a lot, and obviously I also do watch other Bundesliga teams and how they react to being a man down, and more often than not, I feel like other Bundesliga teams manage to deal with being undermanned much better, have way more control, way more parts of the game, and especially way more attacking momentum. Do you think this is something that Dortmund have to work on maybe more actively, since it happens every now and then that they do go a man down? Because I feel like, at least in theory, this Dortmund team should be a little bit more on the front foot still, even though they're down one player.
Yeah, that's a interesting question. I don't, honestly, to say this is down to mentality, I think that's a cop-out on a coaching side. If you bring in Pascal Gross, which I can't necessarily disagree with in that situation, because you need to close a gap that's now created in central midfield. You take off Fabio Silva, you leave on Guirassy, because Guirassy is your more proven goal scorer right now, at the moment, even though right now he's not exactly lighting the world on fire in front of goal. But then after the equalizer in the 75th minute, to then take off Guirassy, bring in Maxi Bayer, to then take off Chukwuemeka, bring in Daniel Svensson. Like, what do you kind of think's going to happen? You know, bringing on Adeyemi late for Jan Koets. I mean, in the 92nd minute, at which point you're just like, oh, you know, the game's over. I think the issue wasn't necessarily mentality-wise. It was more about what are you able to bring on to change a match in an interesting fashion. I think taking off Guirassy and isn't necessarily the wrong choice. I think putting on Maxi Bayer is. I think in that situation, if you're still ambitious enough that you definitely want to score goals, you'd bring on Karim Adeyemi, because I think he's got more of a striker mentality than Maxi Bayer has right now, and I think you would get more from him also on one-on-one situations, which obviously you're going to have more isolation because of the lineup you have backing him up. Beyond that, of course, things are a little skinny on the bench right now for Dortmund, who couldn't even field a full bench. So,
I mean, they could have.
Yes, that is very true.
That's the next segment.
Yes. And again, they should have those young players, put them on the bench. Like this is where I will disagree with Niko Kovac, where Niko Kovac's conservatism does not help, because I disagree with bringing on Bayer for Guirassy when you still had Adeyemi on the bench. Because obviously Adeyemi wasn't too injured to then come on in trash time at the end of the match, but you could have done more in that moment. I think Svensson for Chukwuemeka, when you don't have another real central midfielder on the bench, is also... I don't know. I guess you could have moved Emre Can into central midfield and then brought on Niklas Süle to shore up your central defense a little bit more. Overall, yeah, I think that for me, that just Bayer instead of Adeyemi was a situation where I went, I don't know about that. And then Svensson for Chukwuemeka, I was also like, I don't get it. Those are changes. I understand if things are going well, that maybe for fitness and stuff like that, you could make certain changes like that. But when it's in a draw, in a situation where you could have finished the match day at second and honestly also made up ground on first place Bayern, I think that was too unambitious at that time.
Yeah, for sure. I personally...
and can I add one thing? When I say this isn't a cup tie where you're trying to bring it home. This is a league match where you still have 20 more matches after that. If you end up losing this match, you lose a point on Leverkusen, on Leipzig. You can make up a point over the course of 20 matches. So, again, too unambitious at this point in the season for my liking.
Yeah, same. I mean, I personally, and obviously that would have involved a little bit of risk, but Kani Chukwuemeka, I think, was quoted in the press recently that his favorite position is the number 8. I would have put him on that position, and I would have put Mecha as the holding six, sort of shifting both back a little bit, and then I would have taken off Guirassy because he lacks athleticism, and if Fabio Silva also needed to go at that point due to fitness concerns, I would have just brought on Bayer and Adeyemi at the same time, and if one of those couldn't have done it, I would have probably also brought on Svensson. If you need to make substitutions, you obviously want to go for athleticism, and Pascal Groß is not someone who really does that. Guirassy also, when you have to play a little bit more on the break, since it was more a handball match than a football match pretty much after the red card, is also not your prototypical counter-attack striker, even though obviously you would like to rely a little bit on his holder play, but even that didn't quite come to fruition. I think the lack of ambition was perfectly reflected by the substitutions and decisions that Niko Kovac made, and it is frustrating. Obviously, ideally you want this game put to bed before the red card, and ideally you want this red card to never happen, but these are the circumstances that sometimes just happen during a game, and so I just want Dortmund to deal with such things in a better way. Now, before we talk about the youngsters in general, Niko Kovac did point out after the game that Dortmund are doing much better right now. I mean, at the same time, after 15 match days, last year Dortmund had 25 points. Now they have 29, are in third. Last year, obviously, at the same time, they were in sixth and conceded 22 goals. Now this time they have much fewer in 12, and they have also scored two. No, they have actually scored two less in 24. Last year they had 28 at the same point, but definitely a better goal difference. Niko Kovac, after the game, talked a lot about calmness and compared this season to the last season. Matthias just talked about the lack of ambition. Do you think this is a message to send out as a Dortmund coach to compare this season to what was probably the worst Hinrunde in the decade last year? Or do you think it is allowed for a coach like Niko Kovac to grade his team on a curve?
I mean, first of all, you gave up wrong numbers because you compared last season after 15 match days to this season after 14. And it's actually...
Damn. Well, the numbers still hold true.
Because they had seven. They currently have 7 more points than they had last season, which is quite a big swing after 14 games. It's half a point per game,
I see.
Which is not insignificant. They are level on points with Leipzig, who have no European football to contend with. I can completely understand Niko Kovac trying to calm things down a bit, because I can't really understand where all this unrest is coming from. Obviously, the performances aren't brilliant usually, but they get the job done, kind of. They have lost exactly one Bundesliga game this season, which was away to Bayern, which, can happen. And even in that game, they were much more competitive than most of the Bundesliga usually are against Bayern. Especially at that point in the season, Bayern were considered by far and away the best team in the world, probably, in October. And Dortmund, after playing a terrible first half, were very much in the game in the second half, and I don't know if Jobe Bellingham doesn't have a brain fart or a very unfortunate moment, if we want to be more polite towards him. Dortmund can come away with a point from Munich again, so I can completely understand Niko Kovac's, I don't know, he doesn't seem frustrated to me, because we are asking him about, the level of expectations in basically every press conference, and he's always kind of deflecting and as you said, or pointed out, kind of grading them on a curve. So I can completely understand him there. And to be honest, to me, it doesn't really matter that last season was maybe the worst Hinrunde they've played in years. They've had the general trend of being terrible in the first half of the Bundesliga season for a number of seasons now. And to be honest, the first time that they are kind of, fulfilling my wish of a boring season where nothing crazy happens, they just kind of get the job done. I'm just projecting here that they are going to qualify for the Champions League without any drama or hassle. It's not going to be the final match day of the season, and they need a result, and they need a result on another pitch to go their way or whatever. to me, this is exactly what I wanted and what I think they wanted when they appointed a coach like Niko Kovac, who doesn't have perhaps the highest ceiling, but gets, quite a bit out of his teams because his style of play is rather simple, one might say, but his teams are always fit. He doesn't have a lot of injuries. Obviously, that's now catching up to them a little bit, but it's to be understood, towards the end of a long year for everyone. To me, the discussion around the club, I don't understand where it's coming from, especially when considering that they added basically 2 new players because Jan Couto and Kane Chukwuemeka were already at Dortmund last season, as was Daniel Svensson, if we want to include him in that. So they basically only added Jobe Bellingham, who is 20 years old, has done fuck all in the Bundesliga, let's be honest. And Fabio Silva, who probably lied about being injured when they signed him and is not only now ready to play maybe 60 minutes per game. It's not like they improved their squad massively in the summer or anything, so I don't know where the expectation would come from that they suddenly play this brilliant style of football and play everyone out of the park. They kind of get the job done, and that's all we can ask from Niko Kovac, I find.
Yeah, an interesting perspective. I think it's just the same as always, just the overall resources versus the reality. But if you look at where Dortmund are coming from and the things you just said, yeah, correct. But all these decisions you talked about were decisions Dortmund could have made differently also. Matthias, what is your point of view? Do you think the, let's say, frustration that is also coming out of the player camp in recent weeks? We had the Schlotterbeck outburst after the Champions League game that we've discussed, obviously. Do you think that there's just a feeling that Dortmund are not quite as competitive as they should be right now, internally and externally?
Well, I mean, I kind of echo what Lars said. It's like this... I keep seeing these headlines every week right now. It's like the new crisis in Dortmund, this crisis, that crisis. And I'm just thinking, what crisis? Like, where did people really think Dortmund were going to push to win the Champions League and win the Bundesliga this season, given the massive reload that Bayern was able to do? Like, I don't quite understand this lack of realism is coming from, coupled with ignoring the overall success so far this season. Yes, Dortmund got knocked out of the cup, and that was massively frustrating because I think over 90 minutes Dortmund didn't quote unquote deserve to lose that match, but that's irrelevant. Fact is, they're out of that, and that is frustrating. I think a lot of this stems from the Nico Schlotterbeck, let's call it the Schlotterbeck saga. So you have the question about, will he or won't he extend his contract? Will he, leave? Will he go to Bayern? And then him right after the match voicing understandable frustration when the mic got shoved into his face, which is obviously the reporter's job, and him venting in that moment. And then kind of the world does what it does when someone vents and doesn't give any grace. That maybe is just an ambitious younger player, because he's not like he's an old veteran who's frustrated that they didn't get the result that they wanted to in a specific match. So I think overall, I disagree with the narrative that Dortmund are in a new crisis. Unless, of course, they're creating it themselves internally, at which point all I have to say is you're an idiot. As Lars said, be boring, strive for being boring in the sense of you're not having to do this almost Herculean task of clawing back into the Champions League spots, of being relevant in the Champions League itself. Play strong, steady football. They have, their record this season, their win-loss overall record is really, really good. So I think a lot of it is skewed by the fact that Leipzig are playing quite well this season. Again, they don't have international football to worry about. Bayern are just fantastic this season with a couple of hiccups here and there as well. But overall, they've been extremely good. And given the inconsistencies that other teams below Dortmund have shown, I think everyone can be very happy that Dortmund have been consistently solid. Not great, I would say good, solid to good. And, the developing it to that point where it could be beyond solid to good. I do believe the high floor, low ceiling analysis of Niko Kovac is bang on the money. But he could win something with Dortmund, which is more likely to be the cup. But of course, that didn't happen this season. But as things stand, I think there's no real reason to be overly frustrated and angry. Yes, I said the substitutions there after the equalizer against Freiburg showed a lack of ambition and willingness to take a risk in that situation, which I believe they should have. But that's easy for me to say. I'm not Niko Kovac.
Yeah, all right. So let's move on, because the next issue is also something that we've discussed previously, because Cole Campbell and Julien Duranville, despite the lack of players on the bench, were excluded from the matchday squad due to disciplinary measures. Was Filippo Mane around? I can't even remember. But I feel like he is also with the under 23,
he was, right? Sick for the game in Freiburg, but he's going to be on the bench on Friday against Gladbach.
There you go. So my question to you, is this a talking point?
I mean, first of all, what we have to understand is that we don't get to watch practice. Like, obviously, I would know at this point because I'm there whenever I can. And we have seen exactly 6 times 15 minutes of, warm-ups before Champions League games, because those are mandatory to be open to the press. And I think there were 1 or 2 training sessions for the media open during the first half of the season so far. So when my colleagues are writing this, it basically means someone told them and someone wanted that information to be out there. Whether that's another player or more likely coming from the club, I would, suppose, because, the club obviously have somewhat of an interest in, how the narrative is being portrayed, and the narrative before the reports about why they weren't in the matchday squad were all about Niko Kovac not caring about young players and not giving them any chances, and him wasting, their talent or whatever. So obviously now the talk has switched to maybe there's an attitude problem. Maybe Cole Campbell in particular has already kind of switched off because he wanted to move in the summer and is fairly likely, I would say, to move in the January transfer window. I mean, how many minutes has Cole Campbell played of first team football for Borussia Dortmund? Is it like 40 or something?
No, it's 16.
Okay.
It hasn't changed.
I'm very interested to understanding how anyone can say that he would be a viable option for this team right now, which, as we've established previously, isn't doing as terribly as some of the public opinion would have you believe. The more interesting case to me is Duranville, because we've seen much more of him. Obviously, we remember his cameo in the game that shall not be named. He also had an assist in the brilliant 3-1 win against Barcelona last season. We know that there's a lot of trust in, the football business, in his talent. I think Vincent Kompany, the Bayern head coach, once publicly said that he thinks Duranville is one day going to win the Ballon d'Or. And Kompany obviously...
No pressure.
Kompany obviously gave him his debut back at Anderlecht when Duranville was 16 years old. The problem is I have no idea if Duranville has developed at all from basically that point, because he's been injured so much, and it's been different injuries all the time. A muscle problem here. He fell on his shoulder at the Club World Cup, and that immediately meant we're not going to see him for 5 months. It doesn't seem to me, as of right now, that he's built for professional football. Maybe he can prove me wrong there by going on loan in the winter. I think that's pretty much nailed on at this point, because even if, there were no attitude problems at all, and again, I'm not saying that there are, because I don't really know. Nobody has fed me any information in that regard. Even if there were no problems, obviously there's the problem of Niko Kovac not really playing with out-and-out wingers, which is what I think Julian Duranville probably is. So I think he's going on loan in the winter, and they are hoping to find a place for him where he gets a lot of playing time, and then we can revisit in the summer. But as of right now, nobody can tell me with any certainty that those two players would make any sort of difference for Borussia Dortmund first team at this point. And it's all just conjecture, and people always overhyping young players and talent because it's exciting and new, and there are possibilities that we can imagine because we don't know any better. I would just say one last thing. Niko Kovac is very protective of Jobe Bellingham, who's 19, or who came here when he was 19, now he's 20. He's playing Aaron Anselmino quite a bit, who's on loan, but he's also 20. So I don't think Niko Kovac has a general problem with young players if they're good enough. And to me, the evidence so far suggests that Cole Campbell isn't good enough and Julian Duranville isn't healthy enough to play a meaningful role for Borussia Dortmund.
Yep. Do you know if we can expect either of those two in the matchday squad on Friday against Gladbach? I'm not entirely sure if there was a news conference already and if Niko Kovac said anything about that.
I mean, you can be sure that he's going to be asked about those two guys, if nothing else by myself, but it's a day after our recording, so we don't know yet. But I'm
Okay.
fairly sure if they showed the right reaction, just to, get that topic, closed, I think Niko Kovac is quite happy to include them in the matchday squad. And as I said before, Filippo Mane should be back. He was out sick, but that was, again, like the outrage machine was in full effect because Filippo Mane wasn't on the bench for this game, and they only had Niklas Süle, who's their top earner and has played a lot of international games for Germany and is presumably still a better defender than Filippo Mane.
But yeah, Matthias, should we shift our attention to our next opponent, Borussia Mönchengladbach?
We might as well.
Yeah.
We have already, that was a good segue. Matchday squad upcoming. So, yes, Gladbach.
I don't know. It's similar to Freiburg, isn't it? They're playing an okay ball. The last time I've seen Gladbach was their cup exit against St. Pauli, and in that game, yeah, they did not impress me. St. Pauli actually looked like the much better team, especially from a footballing standpoint. Yep, they recently lost to Wolfsburg in a 3-1 game. They're sitting in 14th place right now. It is definitely a must-win game. I think we can say that much. Matthias?
So, quick point of order. Gladbach sit in 11th. Hamburg are 14th.
Why do I have everything wrong right now? I don't.
I think you were looking at matches played, because that is 14. Gladbach were 14th this season. In fact, they were worse than 14th this season, and they made an interesting appointment in Gladbach club legend Eugen Polanski taking over. And they have definitely improved because they are no longer, in a relegation spot. That being said, I'd be more uncomfortable playing against Freiburg than Gladbach necessarily. I think Gladbach they're okay. They're not good. They're not horrendous like they were at the beginning of the season. Calling this, a must-win in the sense of, if Dortmund don't win this, their season derails. No. Must win in terms of Dortmund are significantly better than Borussia Mönchengladbach. They are playing at home, and this is the kind of match that you expect 3 points from, 100%. Let's keep the boneheaded back passes, or I guess that wasn't even a back pass, forward passes, distribution passes to a minimum. But of course, Dortmund have a little bit of an issue when it comes to their lineup and availability in this match because There's another defender who's not going to be available, if my reading is correctly, in that Bensebaini is off to the Africa Cup of Nations already. And you correct me if I'm wrong, but that was at least what I thought, that he's not available right now until, sometime in 2027, because that's how long the competition seems to last at times. So, I mean, the Achilles heel, as it were, is that Dortmund are going to be exceptionally thin at the back.
Not if they put Süle in. Haha, sorry.
Haha, no, but Schlotterbeck, Süle, and Emre Can will be the back three with Svensson on the left and Riasson on the right. Or
Jan Koto.
Jan Kote on the right. Either way, so they have a starting lineup. They just don't really have a lot of backup options after that, because everyone is injured and or not available. So that is the one point of concern I have here. The rest of the team has enough in it, even with some of the injuries like Sabitzer or Brandt. And of course, Bellingham now being suspended. I think with Mecha, Chukwuemeka, and Gross, you can throw something together. Like Dortmund will have a good to very good starting lineup, and then the bench is going to be dangerously skinny. There's not going to be a lot there, and I think that is really my point of concern in this match. Other than that, Dortmund are the better side than Gladbach, but have to patchwork a team a little bit together, and some of the players that have really played well in the last few weeks, like Julian Brandt, who's played very, very well in the last few weeks, is not going to be available. So there's that, but all in all, Dortmund definitely, this is a must-win in the sense of you expect 3 points.
I'm a little bit annoyed that Jobe Bellingham got a 2-game suspension for that red card. I feel like one would have done it too. I don't think there was much malice in it, but obviously I'm not that entrusted anymore with the rule book of the DFB. So what do I know? But yeah, it's definitely adding insult to injury. Lars, would you pick any other team than Matthias has just described, more or less, for Dortmund's starting 11? Or do you think it's just picking itself right now?
I sort of think we are kind of getting ahead of ourselves because there has been no official communication. Obviously, Dortmund don't really communicate about injuries anymore, but even, trusted media outlets, I'm not so sure. Julian Brandt is definitely out, for example. Haven't heard anything about that. Both Waldemar Anton and Aaron Anselmino seemingly out because especially of their reactions, but it wouldn't be the most shocking thing in the world if maybe one of them was fit enough for the bench and maybe, an emergency option or whatever. So I would just kind of wait for the press conference.
Is Sabitzer definitely out?
I'm assuming so, but once again, absolutely zero communication from Borussia Dortmund, which we've come accustomed to when it's not, really long term. Then I think they kind of feel obligated to inform the public. But these smaller injuries, they don't usually put something out, which kind of made for an interesting situation after the Freiburg game, because in basically a throwaway sentence, Niko Kovac also said that Salih Özcan is currently injured with problems with his Achilles, I think. And nobody knew about that because Salih Özcan doesn't really matter, if we can say it like that, because obviously he's not even in the squad for the Champions League. So when he wasn't part of the training group when we were there for those infamous 15 minutes of nothingness, when nothing interesting happens, nobody bat an eye, because obviously he can't play against Bodo Glimt anyway. But he might be back, because I think I saw him in one of those training videos they put out. So I'm sort of assuming at the end of the day that the things that Matthias said will be true, because obviously they won't, be too risky with Julian Brandt, for example, because he's an important player for them. for the long haul of this season and presumably going forward, because I'm kind of expecting him to sign a contract extension relatively soon. I guess the team will kind of select itself, but to be honest, the same is true for Gladbach, where by whatever miracle, Gio Reyna is the one attacking player who isn't injured right now. But, Tim Kleindienst is out, Frank Honorat is probably out, Robin Hack is out. So Gladbach have pretty much the same issues as Dortmund, and if nothing else, in the last few years, we could always count on Gladbach losing in Dortmund. I think it's again like 6 wins in a row and 21 out of the last 23 or whatever. So it's a similar run of results as was the case with Freiburg, but hopefully a better result for Dortmund.
Yeah. Matthias, I don't know who else to ask this particular question, but are we going to have a case of the hashtag curse of the X as Gio Reyna makes his return to Dortmund on Friday?
Well, now that you said it, obviously, I had actually completely forgotten about that. Maybe. I mean, he's definitely going to be motivated to show off and do something, and he's petulant enough to act accordingly. I don't know. Honestly, I have no idea. I didn't even think about that. So sure, why not? Gio Reyna gets a goal and Dortmund score 3. I mean, like, it'll be what it is. I'm not overly concerned with Gio Reyna being a problem for Borussia Dortmund, knowing that was now the nail in the coffin, and he will score probably the winner for Gladbach at this rate.
We're good at that. So let's see what happens. But Lars, honestly, what are the strengths of this Gladbach team right now? What are players which are still available that Dortmund could potentially be concerned about, or is this more of a Dortmund's to lose kind of situation as it often is? I
mean, it's definitely, because it's a home game for Dortmund, and I don't know, 14 out of the 17 home games of the year, you probably say it's more about what Dortmund do than what the opposition does. To be honest, the only time I've seen Gladbach over the last few months, I think the only time under Eugen Polanski was in the conference on Saturday when they lost to Wolfsburg and apparently put in an absolutely dreadful performance. I think Wolfsburg were up by 2 goals at halftime, and Gladbach pulled one back, and then Wolfsburg scored again, and there was an offside goal for Wolfsburg, which was kind of tight. So a pretty abject performance from Gladbach. I think my colleague who covers Gladbach kind of wrote about it being a relapse of sorts. I think the only player you could probably make a case for being, someone you need to worry about is Haris Tabakovic. He's one of the leading scorers in the Bundesliga, not named Harry Kane. I don't know. I think he has like 9 goals for Gladbach this season in all competitions, and something along those lines anyway. He's like your prototypical number 9, doesn't do anything for the entirety of the game, but somehow ends up with at least a goal and another good chance or whatever. He's definitely not as good a football player as Tim Kleindienst, who's injured, who's probably going to be Germany's starting striker at the World Cup next season if he's fit enough, or next year if he's fit enough. But he's, again, this number 9 who you can't really take out of the game completely. A little bit like Zero Girassi when he's on form. Obviously, Girassi is a better player than Tabakovic, but the type, again, you don't really see him, but he ends up on the score sheet anyway. And he's very, very good in the air, so that would actually be like the concern with the back 3, because I'm presuming it's going to be Schlotterbeck on the left, Süle on the right, and Can in the middle. And obviously, Emre Can, not being a natural centre back, is probably the worst in the air. So if Gladbach managed to isolate, as it were, Tabakovic on Emre Can, that might be an issue. But obviously, you can kind of manipulate these things, and maybe Niklas Süle plays in the middle and Emre Can on the right.
I'm definitely interested to see how Dortmund play in that setup. Like I said on the last episode, I do appreciate it if Nico Schlotterbeck manages to play on the left side, because I just feel like that gives Dortmund's build-up play a few more wrinkles over when he's playing in the middle. So yeah, hoping to see that. I hope Karim Adeyemi is fit enough to start again.
Can I just say, Adeyemi has no injury concerns right now.
Oh, it's not? Okay.
No, he was taken out of the starting lineup against Bodo Glimt for rotation's sake, and then he put in an absolutely terrible performance, and Niko Kovac didn't want to reward him against Freiburg, and then obviously the game state sort of happened in a way that he wouldn't be subbed on before the 92nd minute, but there are no injury concerns for Adeyemi right now.
Fair enough. Well, I still hope he rotates back into the lineup then, that he is off the naughty step then, because I thought he's been playing all right when he's started recently. Obviously, yes, the Bodo Glimt stinker was horrendous. We've discussed that, but yeah, that's pretty much all I have on this game. I think we can knock it on the head here. Lars, Matthias, thank you very much for coming on. And of course, everyone out there, thank you for tuning in. As I'm trying to say it more frequently now, please subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't done so already, where you can also catch this podcast. And if nothing else, we will see you on the flip side after the Gladbach game. Until then, have a lovely time. Goodbye.